Hi everyone, this is your host Annie Zhang, and this is Hello Metaverse. When you picture someone who identifies as a gamer, what does this person look like to you? For the longest time, the predominant stereotype of a gamer was that of a young male tirelessly playing first shooter or role-playing games in his parents' basement. Fortunately, that reality has drastically shifted, where gaming is far more mainstream and that stereotype is quickly fading away. In fact, games are now becoming the most popular place for kids and young adults to hang out today. This phenomenon became very evident during this pandemic, where time spent on popular games like Fortnite, League of Legends, Animal Crossing, and Roblox exceeded that of other popular apps like YouTube and Instagram. Moreover, gaming platforms like Twitch and Discord have begun to replace traditional social or communication platforms as the primary way in which people socialize. What's more astounding is that people are starting to use gaming platforms for much more than gaming. High production value digital concerts like the Travis Scott or the Lil Nas X concerts took place inside of Fortnite and Roblox. People started to have business meetings and school graduations in Animal Crossing, and watching streamers and influencers play Among Us on Twitch became this cultural phenomenon that mimicked a purely digital, real-time reality show. Today, I explore the reasons why gaming is becoming mainstream with Jon Lai, who has been an instrumental figure in bridging the gap between the gaming and consumer tech worlds. We talk about everything from game psychology to the future of blockchain games. Jon is a partner on the consumer investing team at Andreessen Horowitz, focusing on games, next-gen social, and the creator economy. Prior to A16Z, Jon led the North America business development and investment teams at Tencent. And before that, Jon was a product manager at Riot Games, the developers of League of Legends. Jon is a lifetime gamer and can be found roaming the fields of justice during after hours. As a disclosure, all opinions and point of views in this podcast are my own. It does not represent the views of Roblox, my current employer, and is not affiliated with the company. And with that, here is my conversation with Jon Lai. So Jon, you started your career in game development and now you're actually an investment partner at A16Z. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got here and also the changing landscape of gaming that you've witnessed throughout your time?
Absolutely. So just a little bit about me personally. I've been a lifelong gamer and I've spent nearly a decade, as you mentioned, in the games industry as a developer and a publisher. So I started off at Riot, or as a producer and helped work on one of the most popular games in the world, League of Legends, and then spent a bit of time at Tencent afterwards, where I led their North America investments and business development team. And we were responsible for bringing some of the most iconic Western games over to China during my time at the company. I think coming off of all of that, the thing that made me excited about investing was that I wanted to bring a differentiated perspective as one of the few investors in games who had actually worked in the games industry. I think one of the challenging things about being a game company historically has been that it's very difficult to raise money. Games are difficult to evaluate as early stage investments. You need to understand all of this specialized knowledge, like the genres, the platforms, the various business models. And very few VCs historically have any investment experience in games, let alone have actually worked in the games industry. And so I saw an opportunity to fix that by being one of the first games-focused investors. Andreessen Horowitz fortunately shared my vision, so we synced up about 2 years ago, and it's been a great journey since.
And maybe tell us a little bit more about your investment thesis around gaming, or what generally A16Z have been pushing for.
So we believe in sort of two broad theses. The first is that we believe the next social network will be a game. And so what I mean by that is that we're in the business of trying to figure out where the next Facebook is going to come from, the next Snapchat, the next TikTok. And increasingly, if you look at just how young people are spending time today, it's actually in video games. It's not on Facebook. It's not in movies. It's not in music. It's not, and to a certain extent, over the last 2 years, it hasn't actually been hanging out in person either, whether at the mall or after school. It's actually been in these virtual worlds. Games like Fortnite, Roblox, League of Legends, these are the social platforms where people are spending time. And so these products have shifted from just being entertainment into becoming social platforms. They've become super apps because they maintain all of your payments info in addition to your social graph. And there's often messaging and communications protocols as part of these games. And some of them are even jobs platforms. Games like Axie Infinity are creating an entirely new class of creators, people that are making money essentially playing video games. Long story short, like we believe the next big social platform will actually be a game. That's our first thesis. The second thesis is that we believe that games are leading the way in innovation across all sectors. What I mean by that is some of the most popular apps today, TikTok, Calm, Peloton, Robinhood, these were all products that are designed like games, which I would distill down into just making things fun is universal. I have a theory that in the future, call it 5 years from now, almost all of the favorite products that people will use will essentially be games in disguise. And so I think that's the second part of our thesis is other sectors in technology are crossing over and intermingling.
That's really exciting, and I'm so glad that Andreessen Horowitz is taking the steps to do this. I'm super excited to dive deeper on all of the topics that you just mentioned, specifically around why gaming is going mainstream, which you've been a huge proponent for. I want to start with more historical context. What a typical profile of a gamer was versus what it is now, which has changed tremendously. Maybe let's go back to the 70s or 80s. What did a person play then, and then what does a gamer play today?
So gaming has been a story of expansion. So in the 70s and 80s, it was all about arcades and then eventually consoles in the 90s. But the dominant business model back then was pay to play. You put quarters into arcades or you spent, $50 at CompUSA or GameStop or Best Buy to buy these Nintendo games that had cartridges that you then popped into these consoles. And then the demographic of who was a gamer tended to skew younger. It was primarily kids, and it was also primarily male. So it was like young boys that were hanging out in arcades in the mall or going home and then playing Nintendo games with each other. The stereotypes around gamers actually comes from that time period. This is something that you do in your mom's basement when you were a kid, and then when you grow up, you actually stop playing games. But that all started with the 70s, 80s, and 90s. In the late 2000s, new platforms came about. So we had Facebook and MySpace, and then they pioneered social games, is what we call them. They were basically Flash or HTML5 games that were playable within a browser. And then they were the first games that were free to play, meaning that you could actually start playing for free instead of the old model where you have to pay upfront for a price of admissions in order to get into these games. And then the way these games monetized was that they charged you for virtual goods along the way, which also enabled them to sort of capture the full demand curve because some people wanted to pay more than others. With the expansion of games into free-to-play social games in Facebook, and then eventually mobile games as popularized by the iPhone and the App Store in the 2010s, what ended up happening was that the typical gamer profile actually shifted from being younger boys into actually being more mass market. So a lot of women started playing games, games like Candy Crush is actually predominantly female. More casual genres like puzzle games, hidden object games, simulation games cater to a much broader diversity of players, like older players, female players. And I think today, what we're all trying to figure out is, what the next big platform or business model shift is going to be. Very excited about the blockchain. We can dive deep into this and play to earn potentially as a new business model. But just zooming out a bit, going back to the original point I made, the beautiful thing about games is that it's a story of expansion. New platforms have expanded the audience historically. I'm very excited about seeing this continued expansion happen in the industry.
It seems like really access and distribution has been the key levers for making this expansion happen. So beyond access and distribution, what are the social reasons why stereotypes and perceptions around gaming have shifted? I mean, obviously you mentioned that more people are just playing, and so probably people can see others like them playing, so they're like, okay, I want to play as well. But what other phenomenon has happened to really pull people in, especially like now there's a ton of female gamers, and then there's also a lot of people who are quote unquote in the gaming industry, but not actually even gaming. They're doing other stuff.
In order for culture change, there needs to not only be change in the customer base, but there also needs to be change in the creators themselves. And so I think that's another underlying trend that's been happening in games, which is that, historically, you had men that were building these games. And I think that evidenced itself in a number of things. Like there was a lot of first-person shooters, there were a lot of action-oriented violent games. As free-to-play, as social games, mobile games that have emerged, there's been more diversity in the creators themselves. People tend to make games that they themselves would like to play. There's been an increase in diversity over the years, and I think that's lent itself to this culture shift as well.
It almost feels like what's happening in gaming now is basically what happened in video in the last decade or so. The types of content that you see on YouTube is far different than what huge production companies were filming. I would love to get back to how the entire creation system is going, but first I want to dive into something a little bit more foundational. I want to talk a bit more about game psychology and the mechanisms of gameplay. Now that there's a lot of these mechanisms that are actually adopted in mainstream products beyond gaming, I'm curious to hear about what is so appealing and rewarding to people about game psychology and gameplay.
Well, I have an issue with the idea of game mechanics being the key thing that makes something a game or fun, so to speak. Part of that is I'm pushing back hard against the idea of gamification, which is the idea that you can basically take a bunch of mechanics from a game and slap that on top of a product and then say, hey, we're done. The mechanics that people most often refer to are things like, badges, points, leaderboards, giving everyone a level. If we go back to basics, like what is game design and what makes games fun? Almost all modern game design is based on self-determination theory, which posits that all human motivation is either extrinsic or intrinsic. An extrinsic motivation is an external factor that is telling you to do something. So like an authority figure, like a teacher saying, hey, do your homework, a parent saying, hey, eat your vegetables. That's like extrinsic motivation. Studies have shown that that is actually the least effective at motivating people toward an activity or a goal. Intrinsic motivation, on the other hand, hits some sort of fundamental human needs. Three of them that I'll highlight: there's autonomy, which means that people want to be in charge of their life. They want to make decisions for themselves. There's competence, which is that we want to get good at things. We want to improve. We want the path toward mastery. And then the last is relatedness, which is that we want to connect with others. We want to socialize. Human beings are sort of fundamentally social creatures. And so the best games are a masterclass in intrinsic motivation. They hit on all three of those factors. They give you the autonomy to make your own decisions as to how you achieve a goal or how you play the game. In an MMO, for example, like World of Warcraft, you can be a farmer and basically just level up by crafting things and harvesting things. You can also decide to be very aggressive and do PvP, which is player versus player, and then you basically go around in a perpetual state of combat. But you have the choice of how you want to play. Competence, which is the idea of getting good at things, a trademark of all great video games. You start off not being good at something, and then by the end of the game, you're very good, right? And this is partially player skill. You get better at just tactics of clicking on things, reading enemy patterns, and knowing how to react. And then the game also measures your path to mastery through things like levels, skill points, badges. This is where the gamification people get it wrong. They look at the sort of trappings of competence and they say, oh, okay, great. If we just take levels and we just slap them onto a product, we'll make it a game. But they fail to see that the levels are actually an output of that intrinsic motivating factor. People want to get good because they're trying to achieve something, and then the levels just measure how good they are, as opposed to being a goal in itself. And then finally, with relatedness, almost all of the biggest games today are social, like you're playing them with other people. Stepping back a bit, the best products today understand that it's intrinsic motivation that matters. When they lose sight of that, the result is sort of dry, boring software that no one wants to use. Things like TikTok, Clubhouse, Peloton, Zwift, et cetera, they understand that it's all about intrinsic motivation. They've actually integrated the fundamental principles of game design into their product design, as opposed to just taking on the trappings of games.
What's interesting is we also see the inverse happening as well. There are a lot of originally gaming specific products or products that are targeted towards the gaming community that's now proliferating towards, a mass audience. So can you tell me about examples of that? And also, do you think that these companies are succeeding in reaching other verticals?
I think that path is actually very natural. There was a joke that all innovation starts in games, goes to consumer, and ends in enterprise. And it sounds flippant, but there's a seed of truth there. Like you look at Slack, for example. It started off as a game, Glitch, which was a browser-based MMO, if I remember correctly. It evolved into a prosumer product for small businesses, mostly startups. And then over the years, it's now evolved into a full enterprise-grade collaboration software that's used by some of the biggest companies in the world. And I think that's a pattern that Discord, for example, is also following. Like it started off as a gaming tool. It was being used specifically by very hardcore MMO guilds that needed to raid, and they needed to coordinate the activities of like 100 people together at once. That was a very niche gaming specific activity. And then it broadened from there to sort of general consumer verticals. And so you had anime watching groups, you had sneakerheads that were like meeting on Discord, and they were using Discord as an async platform in order to trade sneakers. Things that would actually be very hard to like find out the answer to on the general internet. But Discord makes it possible to have these sort of vertical communities of sort of like-minded people. And now they've basically become a business collaboration suite for a lot of startups. Many of the companies in our portfolio are using Discord to replace, Slack and Microsoft Teams and other types of collaboration software, because there's async communication through text. There's also real-time communication when you need it, when you can jump into a channel and you can talk to each other. And then they have the ability to live stream and share your desktop. They're adding more functionality to enable that horizontal expansion. If I could wrap it all up, one of the things that's special about games is that they think a lot about what makes activities fun. They build for retention. And then once you have an engaged and well-retaining user base, you can actually expand from there into other use cases, new audiences, new verticals, etc.
It's so crazy that Discord is now starting to actually surpass Slack in terms of its capabilities of doing enterprise collaboration. I mean, it's not surprising, but it just shows how fast technology is moving. So I think you touched on some really interesting phenomenon that gaming products have been able to enable. One is the communication, mass coordination of communities online. So that's kind of the Discord use case. Another that you sort of touched upon is the Twitch streaming phenomenon of this idea where you're just interested in following very authentic content, very frequently live from random strangers on the internet. And then the third one that I want to get to is coordination within 3D worlds and experiencing new things within 3D worlds. So maybe let's talk a bit more about the phenomenon of streaming. What caused the rise of streaming? What is it so appealing about it? And why is it growing so rampantly?
So live streaming has been around, I think, for almost a decade now. If we consider Twitch to be the birth of modern live streaming in the West, I think Twitch launched, in 2010 or 11. So it's been almost 10 years. The unique thing about live streaming is that it's real time and interactive. As an audience member, you can talk to and actually make requests of a live streamer, and the programming can change according to what the audience is feeling or wants. And I think that's very unique relative to other forms of media that's just more static. If you're watching a film, if you're listening to a song, it doesn't change regardless of how the audience feels. I think another interesting point is that a lot of people today in the industry think live streaming is a relatively mature category. We don't see a lot of startups that are actually trying to go build a Twitch competitor, for example. And I think I personally disagree with that view. I think, yes, Twitch has been around for 10 years, but 10 years is nothing if you compare it to the history of any new media. 10 years into film or music or video games, you could say that the media was mature, that we were going to have, black and white TV with no sound and short segments that weren't longer than, 10, 20, 30 minutes, because that's all they could do in the early days. And you would have been horribly wrong. You would be totally amazed by the things that we're doing in all of those categories today. So I think in similar fashion, we're just scratching the surface of what's possible with live streaming today. And there's a lot of innovation, I think, that's possible. And there are a lot of companies, I think, that are innovating around the fringes of live streaming, taking live streaming and combining it with other categories that I find exciting. Just to use an example, companies like Proletariat with Streamline, Outpost Games, Scavengers with Darwin Project, these are all game companies that have tried to make games where the audience can vote to affect what happens in the game. So think Hunger Games. The audience can vote to turn the floor into lava, send the player a power-up. And I think there's still a lot of attempts and efforts to sort of build something in the space that works at scale. Like, how do we build a massive game that's interactive, that has streamers sort of, working and playing with their audience, as opposed to just having it just be chat
It's almost like you're, what's the word? Vicarious playing through streamers, and you probably have more access to different parts of the game than if you were to start from scratch and only rely on your personal skills. You also mentioned an interesting example within Among Us, which is, I remember the idea that people loved watching streamers play each other within Among Us, because then it reveals some of the social dynamics or the characteristics and personalities of different streamers as they go through tricky social situations within Among Us. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I'm glad you asked that. I think one of the key reasons why Among Us was successful that is probably not well understood at large is that they basically turned Twitch into a reality TV show, right? And so as you mentioned, some of the biggest streams early on that promoted Among Us were ones where you had multiple prominent live streamers that were playing the game together at the same time. They were combining their audiences that in some cases were very different, in some cases like wildly polarizing personalities. Like you had one person that was a complete troll that didn't take the game seriously and just wanted to prank other people. You had like the super competitive, streamer that absolutely had to win at all costs. So it's basically set up like a reality TV show, right? Like you have different personalities that are like crash land on an island and you're trying to survive. And that's what Among Us was and sort of these short sessions. And then even better, the way Among Us works is that your role changes every game, right? In some games, you're a crew member and you're just trying to survive and work together with your crew. In other games, you're an imposter, meaning that you're trying to sabotage the mission and you're trying to kill off the crew without being discovered. And so you also had these streamers like role play. You could see them in moments of stress and drama as they had to take on new roles. You see like potentially new parts of their personality and dimensions. There's a lot of potential here in doing more stuff like that. I think Twitch as a reality TV show is probably underexplored just as a category of innovation and content. I think there's a lot that we could do just in role playing. They all answer a fundamental human need and how we love to fantasize. We love pretending to be a different person than we are today.
I love this idea of gaming reality shows. That would just take it to the next dimension. I mean, not only the reality show itself, but all of the mechanisms, all of the content, all of the hype around it. It sounds so exciting, and Netflix better get on that as soon as they can. I want to talk a bit about the meta layer around games. I saw that you recently invested in Loki, which is all about like easily capturing, editing, and sharing gameplay externally. It feels like now there's a world where social media is going to be dominated by content, or maybe like voyeurism of people playing in other experiences online and then sharing that out. Is that getting more into the mainstream? Are we in a year, say, going to see that all over TikTok? Where are we at in terms of sharing gameplay and virtual experience clips?
I think we're getting there. Gameplay clips and highlights reels. They're some of the most popular content on YouTube and TikTok. I think YouTube gaming was the second largest vertical behind music last year in 2020. I think the next challenge for video is that you have so many unique advantages when you're recording something that is natively digital, as opposed to if you're recording like a sporting event. It's an analog experience. You have to set up cameras. It like takes a lot of production essentially to record like good gameplay footage of the football game. But in a video game, it's on your computer. It's fundamentally digital. The data is all hosted and streamed over the internet. There's a lot more that you could do with video and games that's not being done today. Whether that's just making that video interactive. I think one of the things that Loki recently launched that I'm quite excited about is just adding picture-in-picture with people's faces on top of their clips. If I make a really sick play, like if I get a pentakill on League of Legends, and then I just go nuts, I'm screaming and I'm cheering, you should be able to see my face as part of that because it's a very emotional story. And then maybe you even see the faces of the people that I played against or my teammates that are cheering me on. And you get a little bit of this like narrative storytelling that you get in the real world when you're, at a sporting event or you're at a party with your friends. Like, how do you translate some of that emotion? How do you story tell better when you have a natively digital form of media.
The idea of having natively digital content just opens up so many doors. This is probably a little bit more out there, but I could see a world where you could share content and then people could enter that content if they have access to the platform. Maybe I share my little role-playing shtick on Dungeons and Dragons and I did something sketchy and I want to tell the world about that, and you can actually go in and experience it for yourself. That would be insane. And then maybe even on a VR set, which would be even more insane.
A great example of that is mods. People mod these games sometimes where they take a base game and they turn it into a new experience, sometimes a completely different gameplay. And like one of the challenges right now is that there are phenomenal mods that are being created by individual creators, but they're very hard to discover because distribution is a challenge on the internet. And so I think if you combine mods of video, where if a top live streamer is streaming a mod, and then you can just click through and then here's the mod, enter it, start playing with the streamer, it's actually like a live server. That solves a lot of the distribution pain points that these creators have, and it makes sense. I think there's just so much more that could be explored at the intersection of video and then video games.
Yep, definitely. So let's dive deeper on this whole digital universe idea. You talk a lot about still examples of role playing, but what are you seeing in terms of non-gameplay like experiences? Entertainment has been a huge part. We saw the Travis Scott concert in Fortnite. There's been concerts in Roblox, etc. And then a lot of different companies now are exploring what is the future of work within a metaverse, or maybe even education. Do you think that we're at a point where more of these utility-based use cases are going to be adopted by consumers?
I think we're going to continue to see more use cases being integrated into games. And I think at the end of the day, it just comes down to where people are spending time, right? You want to reach people where they're spending time, and it turns out that that's a game. That's why Travis Scott appeared in Fortnite. It was a way of reaching people that otherwise have never experienced his music. It probably turned millions of those players into fans.
That's a great heuristic of product development, which is get people to be there first and spend the bulk of their time there. And then whatever else you want to introduce, they'll probably give it a try.
There are precedents of this happening outside of games as well, right? The concept of super apps. Take WeChat, for example, which is probably the most well-known super app. The idea is that people in China spend their entire lives on WeChat. That's where all their friends are. It's the social graph. They spend all their time messaging and communicating with each other. Over time, Tencent has basically built out a whole portfolio of apps and services on top of WeChat. So in addition to chatting, you can click on the Discover tab. And oh, by the way, are you hungry? Well, great. Click on the Food tab and you can order food. And are you trying to get someplace to meet up with that same friend that you just messaged? Well, guess what? There's Didi here, and you can just order a car and it'll show up outside of your door because it knows where you are. They've integrated all of these utility services precisely because WeChat is just where people are spending time. They have the audience, they have the engagement. And if you're trying to get distribution for your ride-sharing app or your food service, it makes sense just to be where people are, as opposed to forcing folks to go somewhere else and download a new app. There's a world where 10 years from now, the biggest games in the world are super apps. They're digital hubs.
Yeah, I was just going to say, WeChat sounds basically like the metaverse, but in 2D. So we talked a little bit about democratizing and lowering the friction of creation within games, both from creation tools side, as well as developments within AI and computer-generated images and people. Tell me about how we are getting much better at creating content within the metaverse.
So my main contribution to the discourse around the metaverse is that I've been a tireless advocate for the importance of user-generated content in building the metaverse. To put it simply, I don't think the metaverse is possible without UGC platforms to scale content development. I think the crux of the issue is that when you think about what the metaverse is, the very definition of a metaverse is that it is an infinitely scaling virtual space that has its own virtual economy and infrastructure and a bunch of other things. But at the end of the day, it's about size. It needs to be a large enough space and immersive enough that people want to spend thousands of hours inside the metaverse. And the challenge today is that there are just not enough professional content creators in the world to populate a single virtual world, let alone, a universe of worlds with the richness of detail that you need for a truly immersive experience. And so while the metaverse might start as a stepping stone with a really high quality, professionally developed world or experience, take Fortnite, for example, which many people point to as a precursor to the metaverse. for things like Fortnite to evolve into the persistent, infinitely scaling virtual space that it wants to be, it needs to enable users to create content as well and to build the infrastructure that supports creation as a career. And just to clarify what I mean by user-generated content, it doesn't have to be full-on worlds or games. They can be as simple as just creating individual items, character skins, weapons and armors, just virtual goods. And then one level up from there, like you can create like mini apps that help you do something in the game better. One level up from items or mini apps to mods that take the base game and turn it into a new experience. There are many different levels of UGC, and I think in order to sort of populate the virtual world and provide enough content so that everyone has something that they're interested in doing, you really need to have UGC platforms to scale.
This is actually a great segue towards decentralization or the blockchain and NFT technology. So now that there is these virtual worlds, a lot of people are talking about ownership and what is the back-end pipes to enable this marketplace to happen. What are you seeing in the NFT world to essentially power the creation of this UGC?
So I'm very excited about the new business model of play to earn, which is something that I think the blockchain enables in games. And the high level idea of play to earn is that players can earn money by playing a video game. And it sort of flips the trope on its head that traditionally like you had to pay money in order to play a game, but now like you can actually play a game in order to earn money. And the way it works traditionally is that you earn in-game currency by playing the game and doing activities that you can then exchange for fiat, which is our real world currency, US dollars, etc. The poster child of this right now is Axie Infinity, which is a sort of creature collector game. It sort of looks like Pokemon, where you collect a team of cute furry creatures and you battle other teams of cute furry creatures. As part of playing this and winning these battles, players earn something called smooth love potions, which are basically just virtual currency inside the game. And you can sell smooth love potions, on the marketplace because they're actually a necessary ingredient to breed Axies, the little furry characters. The more you play the game and the more you win, the more currency you have that you can exchange for real world currency. And like the top players in Axie Infinity are earning up to $400 a day playing the game full time. And that is incredible. A large percentage of that game's player base is actually in Southeast Asia. There are just not a lot of economic opportunities that actually pay that much. And so it's actually enabled an entire new class of creators that's playing Axie Infinity full time as a job. And another exciting thing that's happening here is the concept of leasing. If you don't have the money to actually acquire a full team of Axies in order to play the game, you can actually borrow it from someone else who does. You're basically renting an asset, and eventually, like as you make money, you can buy your own Axies and then become full-time player of the game. So much fascinating innovation happening in play to earn.
I love that you mentioned Axie because I've just been going down a complete rabbit hole of it. What I love the most is it really seems like it's starting to level the playing field economically. The people who are going to go and breed these Axies and become trainers, they're the people who are probably really idle, don't have a lot of time, or unemployed or looking for money. And in many cases, it's either students or kids or people from emerging economies who are looking for new opportunities. And the fact that these are going to be like the pioneers of that platform, and as the platform grows further and further, they're going to have a stronger leverage is kind of almost scary, but great at the same time. I think the metaverse will really shift power dynamics as well as like economic influence around the world.
But I think we're also scratching the surface right now in the types of jobs that can be created as well. Like right now, in Axie, for example, most people think of it as just a professional game player who's just like playing the Axies, like battling the Axies. But I think there's many other types of roles that are possible in the virtual economy that's developing around these games. To diversify a bit and break from Axie, so we recently invested in a company called Virtually Human that makes the game Zed Run. It's a digital horse racing game built in the blockchain, where every horse is an NFT with a unique bloodline and attributes like speed and stamina, just like a real world horse. And by itself, that would just make for a pretty ordinary sort of creature collector game where you're collecting horses and racing them. But because of the blockchain, the game of horse racing can actually increase the value of the underlying horse asset, since the horse's win-loss record is permanent and tracked in the blockchain. And so what this means is that it leads to a couple of different jobs to be done. So there's the jockey, quote unquote, who is good at picking and entering races and winning them. There's the scout, who like scours the marketplace looking for undervalued horses, i.e. like, the diamonds in the rough, who have a poor win-loss record because their previous owner didn't know how to race them. But you recognize the value in that horse, and then you can acquire that horse and then turn it over to a jockey that fixed that record. And then there are like the breeders who collect horses for studying, and they basically breed horses full time and flip them to the market. And so these are just a couple of examples of different roles that are emerging around the Z-Run economy. So it's not just people that are racing horses. There's a whole sort of like virtual economy and different supporting roles along every step of the value chain. And I think like we'll see more of that as we have different blockchain games and play to earn becomes more of a thing. As an individual player or creator or fan, you can pick something that you are uniquely qualified for or excited to do, and you can make a living off of that, which I think is just really exciting and so inspiring.
Yeah, that's going to open so many opportunities for people. Speaking of which, there's a lot of marketplaces now for NFTs or digital goods. Have you seen any emergences of jobs marketplaces, essentially?
The closest thing that I'm excited about is just the concept of guilds. There's a company called Yield Guild Games, where it's a community of folks that are excited to play and interact with these crypto games. A lot of them are leasing assets to each other. You have a little bit of this like landlord renter economic dynamic where there are people with assets, but people that are asset rich and time poor can basically rent out their assets to other folks that are time rich but asset poor. These guilds are very young. Like they haven't been around for longer than a year or two. So there's going to be a lot more development that happens. And as these communities grow, I can imagine that like they turn into jobs platforms as well.
Wow, you just made me think about the idea of actually having like a credit score in the digital world. What would that even mean? What would it mean to have credit? What is like the proof of your credit? That's a fascinating question to ponder on.
That's a key ingredient of how you determine whether you rent land to someone here in real life. And you're right, that's something that's yet to be built in these crypto games. But I think there's an opportunity, especially since all activity is tracked in the blockchain. Like you can actually go back and you have verifiable history of a person's activity. It's like, oh, okay, like they said they raced horses for 3 years. Well, let's go and like check out every race that they horsed and whether they won or lost. If anything, like the credit scores that you have in the crypto world are going to be like insanely good, way better than anything we can get in real life.
I think with all the examples that you gave, we're getting to see a better picture of what are the use cases that the blockchain can enable. But I want to still ask the question for those who are still unfamiliar with what it means to build an experience on the blockchain, what it meant for Axie Infinity or Virtually Human. Like literally explain what that means technically for people so they have a better grasp of what's happening behind the scenes.
So I think the best way to think about it is that for a crypto game like Axie Infinity or Zedrun, there are two broad components. There's the game, which for Axie is a Pokemon type game where you collect creatures and you battle them against each other. And for Zed, you have a stable of horses and there are these regular races that you enter. And then based upon the attributes of your horse, you either win or lose. There's that piece, there's the game. And that game is built like any other traditional game, right? Like you have game developers, you have artists, designers, engineers. And then there's the crypto piece, which is how do you then take elements of these games and put them in the blockchain? And so for Zed, the way they did it was that every horse is an NFT, a non-fungible token, meaning that it's unique, it's verifiable permanent ownership. So if you own a horse, no one can take that away from you. The game can't say, okay, I want that horse back, or actually I'm going to change that horse, make it stronger or weaker. Like it can't do that. It's an asset that you own permanently and it's tracked in the blockchain and on Ethereum, which is completely independent of Virtually Human, the company. For Axie, it's the same thing of like the Axie characters, the non-fungible tokens. When you buy them, you own them. You can resell them if you want. And then for both of these companies, the games have also built a marketplace where people can trade these non-fungible tokens directly with each other. And I think that's where a lot of the economic activity happens. As you improve the quality of a horse through racing it and you win, it becomes more valuable. And you can actually then go and sell that horse on the Zedrun marketplace for more than you acquired it for. But it all starts with this concept of like, hey, there's a game, and then there's the blockchain, and then how can we put some of our assets on this blockchain, a process called minting, and then that minting process and the non-fungible tokens that result bring with it a host of benefits like I talked about.
Got it. That's a really good visualization. So essentially the user experience is still built like a regular game, but the economic engine is what lives on the blockchain.
That's right. That's a good summary right there. I would emphasize that right now, like we're still fairly early in crypto games. I'm excited to see what phase 2 could look like. There are startups these days that are trying to push the envelope of innovation. And that model that I mentioned, where you have a game and then you have the blockchain and then you have sort of the economic engine on the blockchain, they're trying to think of ways to merge that. What would it mean if you were to design a game from ground up for the blockchain? And so it actually wasn't even playable without the blockchain. There's a game that's very early that's being made by a couple of students out of MIT, where basically it's an RTS, so it's similar to StarCraft. You're exploring a galaxy and then you are trying to colonize different planets and stars within that galaxy. And the way you discover planets is you actually mine Bitcoin.
Mm.
And so that's an example of like a mechanic which you can't separate the game from the blockchain. It's actually tied into like the fundamental nature of the game. My prediction is that there will be a game that totally integrates those two in a way that is just completely mind-blowing that we haven't seen yet and really opens up the possibilities of like new game mechanics, new gameplay modes that's only possible with the blockchain.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that as well. And I feel like whenever economics are tied to gameplay, it becomes real, right? It's no longer just something you do for fun. There's way more skin in the game, for a lack of a better word. I have one last question for you. There's a lot of hype around the metaverse and around gaming becoming mainstream. Especially right now, it's all I see on Twitter. It's all that anybody talks about within tech. Do you think right now the hype is justified? And are we actually on the verge of creating a new type of internet experience?
So I think at the end of the day, there will be stepping stones to the metaverse. There was a lot of hype around, hey, like the metaverse, it's going to totally change everything and it's going to be here in the next like year or two. And like, I think that is not going to happen. There needs to be a lot of building yet to be done. I think the blockchain, like play to earn, like different types of jobs, virtual economies, all of that are like stepping stones. And then UGC platforms, what I mentioned earlier about scaling content creation. And my guess is that like the metaverse will happen and it will happen probably sooner than people think, but it won't be this shining product launch from some company where it's like, hey, like we've been working on this for 10 years and boom, here's the metaverse and everything's going to be great. It's going to be the cumulative sum of a bunch of different companies working in completely different spaces on completely different products, payments, infrastructure, content, VR, AI, like new form factors for like human computer interaction. All of these things come together, and in one day, we'll just look up and the game or the social network that we've been spending all of our time in will realize, hey, like this actually checks all of the boxes of a metaverse, right? It's a persistent, infinitely scaling virtual space where all of my friends are hanging out. And by the way, like I've got a job in the metaverse, I'm making money, and that money is transferable across a bunch of different apps and games and experiences within this. And to a certain extent, like I spend more time here than I do in the real world. I think that's going to happen sooner than people expect. And it'll be this aha moment that it's like, hey, we've been living in the metaverse this whole time. We just didn't realize it.
Is it daunting to you or is it exciting to you that we're going to spend more time in the metaverse than in the real life?
I think it's inspiring to me. Actually, a really important point that I want to make here. These podcasts, a lot of the Twitter conversation that you see happening, it's happening among like the top 0.01% of the world, right? Like we are like the intellectual, literati, the folks that like have access to like great internet. We live in San Francisco, like the tech capital of the world, and we drive nice cars, et cetera. So we're very privileged. I think one of the things that my partner, Mark Andreessen, wrote about and talks about all the time is that actually like, the vast majority of the world does not live in places that are as interesting as San Francisco. They don't drive nice cars. They don't have interesting jobs. They actually can't have the types of intellectually stimulating conversations that we're having right now in this podcast. And so for like the 99% of the world that like does not live in an exciting place where they want to spend all of their time in the real world, the metaverse, the concept of virtual spaces where you can be anyone that you want, you can have any economic opportunity that you chase after, that is way more exciting than real life. And so I think from that perspective, I'm excited because I think it's going to be great for 99% of the population. The 1% of us that do live in interesting places, we can debate whether it's good or bad for us, but I think that it'll be a positive.
That's an incredible reminder because what I lament on is what if I can't just go down the coffee shop? What if I can't go to the art gallery and all the time I'm just online? But most people don't have access to that. And so really by leveling the playing field within the metaverse is a beautiful thing. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for all of your time today. This was really eye-opening and I've learned so much. That was Jon Lai. You can find him on Twitter or follow his essays and podcasts on his personal website, jonlai.co. Again, Jon is a partner at Andreessen Horowitz, and if you don't follow them already, they have an incredible podcast that I've followed for a very, very long time for the latest and greatest tech deep dives. It's called A16Z, and you should definitely follow along as well. If you like this episode, feel free to hit that subscribe button and please leave a review. If you have feedback or ideas for topics or guests to bring on the show, please email me at annie@hellometaverse.fm. Thank you as always for listening. This is your host, Annie Zhang, and I will see you next week.